2024 really was sort of the changing of the guard, or an end of an era in Colorado, because for the first time since I've been doing this, coal was not our number one source of electricity generation. And Colorado's average retail price of electricity is a full $1 per kilowatt more than the Mountain West average. And if you look at every individual state in the Mountain West, we have higher average retail residential rates. So we're the most expensive electricity in our entire region. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of PowerGab, your go-to show for all things energy and environmental policy in the state of Colorado. I'm Jake Fogleman, joined as always by my co-host Amy Cooke. And this week we wanted to just do a little bit of a sort of a roundup update of the state of Colorado, but to start, something that got, I think, both of our attention, you noticed it first, was a tweet from our governor, Governor Polis. If you want to tell the listeners a little bit about what this tweet was and why it caught your attention.
Yeah, because it's a lie. Can we just start with that? I mean, so here's the tweet. And it says, in Colorado, this is from Governor Jared Polis. This is on his Gov of CO Twitter profile. In Colorado, we work to lower costs, not raise them. And I will continue to fight for the Coloradans and Americans affected by Trump's reckless tariffs. And then there are several headlines that he puts in there. Colorado Newsline, which is the lefty news organization. Colorado among states that could be hardest hit by Trump tariffs on Canadian oil. And then there are more in there, but I'm just going to leave it at that, and we'll start with that. Listen, he and his party, the Democrats, have the power to pass whatever horrific legislation they want. And God knows they've passed a lot, especially as it affects energy. Plus, they've tried to destroy, and almost have, I mean, they've got their boot on the neck of domestic, local oil and gas production. So the fact that he actually tweeted that when we know what he's done to electricity prices, and in particular, electricity prices in Colorado, and our friends at the Common Sense Institute have said 15% over the last 3 years. 15%, and that's on top of all of the other increases we have seen the years before that. And what does the Colorado Business Journal say? The number one reason why? Well, because we have spent so much money on trying to accommodate his 100% wind and solar and storage agenda. So when I said this, I said, I actually responded to him. I said, listen, you have the power. You and your party have the power to pass whatever horrific policies you want, and they can do it, and they have. But you won't get away with lying about the results. And that was you. You can say that, but it is, we work to lower prices. I'm going to throw the BS flag on that one every single time. I mean, it is so tone deaf. Read the state, for the love of God. Were you not there when there was a task force about the high cost of energy from Xcel? And they are responsible. Literally, he has signed bills for which he is responsible for driving up costs. So, and say that really as a preface to an excellent post that you wrote, and it's a follow-up. You've been doing this. How many years? 2 years, 3 years now?
About 3, yeah.
Okay. Where the full year of EIA data comes out, and you do sort of a state of the state, just a quick recap of data points about energy in Colorado. And so here's the cool thing, just so everybody knows about how good Jake is. As I was looking on another podcast, I was going on another podcast as a guest, and I was looking up Colorado data just real quick. And I use ChatGPT a lot. And I always make it cite its sources, because you never know what it's going to say. And so I want to know if it's actually accurate. And they cited your post from 2023 and 2024 data about Colorado's energy production, which of course use EIA, but they pulled it from Jake's post. You can find it on thinkfreedom.org. When you go to issues, the drop down is energy and environment. It's the top one there. But I just wanted everybody, they cited you. So and not from any prompting from me. They just pulled your post. So it's pretty cool. You have a lot to be proud of for that.
Yeah, no, it definitely is really cool. And I noticed Google's AI started doing it as well, just because once you told me that, I wanted to check it out. And the little top, AI generated portion of Google searches is starting to cite as well. So it's very cool. But yeah, like you said, I do this every year because around February of every year, the EIA releases a new crop of monthly data. And it's a bit of a lag time, it takes some time to compile all this stuff.
We should probably tell people what EIA is.
Oh, yeah.
Again.
Good point. Yeah, the Energy Information Administration, it's essentially the statistical arm of the U.S. Department of Energy. And so they're in charge of collecting just vast swaths of utility data and different types of resources. And it's a gold mine for nerds like us that love to know what's going on in the world of energy. And it's all right there in a repository. So they produce these monthly reports. They call it Electric Power Monthly. And it's delayed a few months. So February's release gives you December 2024, and then everything obviously previous gives you monthly data for the entire year. So I go through and I comb through, and it's a big hulking several 100-page report, and I try to mine some of the key data points that I think would be interesting, so people have just a basic primer of what happened in Colorado's energy over the given year. And since prices were what we talked about before, maybe I'll jump to the prices portion, because this is interesting. It's a pretty consistent finding we've seen. So Colorado's average residential retail price of electricity, so it's the rate that retail ratepayers are paying, have gone up. They're above 15 cents a kilowatt hour for the year. And the reason that's interesting is, Governor Polis likes to always say that, we're below the national average. We're below the national average. Things are so affordable. And yeah, we are below the national average, but because there's outliers like California and Hawaii that jack up the average for everyone else. But if you look at our neighbors, EIA groups us into Mountain West, a region of Mountain West states, and it's all the states you would think of that, directly surround Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, Wyoming, et cetera. It's about 8 states. And Colorado's average retail price of electricity is a full $1 per kilowatt more than the Mountain West average. And if you look at every individual state in the Mountain West, we have higher average retail residential rates. So we're the most expensive electricity in our entire region, all these states that have similar geographies and similar, at least historically, similar resource profiles. And we're more expensive than our neighbors. So.
And that hasn't always been the case.
No, it certainly has not always been the case.
We have traditionally, it's been Arizona,
right,
has been one of the highest.
Yeah, Nevada sometimes as well.
Just depends. And now Colorado is, and you look at how much higher we are for the rest of the Mountain West states, which is why we are going to be left behind economically.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And it's why we always cite, we've done past episodes where we talk about what Utah's doing, what Wyoming's doing. It's because these are very similar states in terms of their natural resources that they have, obviously climate, geography. And so it's a good case study in terms of where Colorado's going, where these states are going, and then let's look at the results economically. And at least for price of electricity, they ain't great.
And we've seen this trend over the last 3 years, because you do 3 years worth of data.
Yeah, that's right. And it was a couple of years ago that I think we were below Nevada. Like you said, every once in a while, there's one of these states that's above us. And no, this is the first time that I've been compiling these stats that we are higher than every single one of our neighbors.
And significantly higher than the Mountain West average. That's right. The other thing, like significantly higher.
And I put all this data, by the way, just for listeners, I put all this data in nice visually appealing charts, so you don't have to, read through wonky cents per kilowatt hour figures. And we'll obviously link to that in the show notes so folks can check this out for themselves and see where I got it from. But the other big news, other than the electricity prices, I think one of the big top line takeaways is that 2024 really was sort of the changing of the guard, or an end of an era in Colorado, because for the first time since I've been doing this, coal was not our number one source of electricity generation. And I think folks maybe might expect that because, we've had policy mandates for how many years now to phase out coal and fuel switching that you've talked about in the past. And now there's PUC mandates to eventually phase it out. But up until last year, coal still was the number one source of electricity. And in 2024, gas took its place.
So shock, let me think. Who said in 2010, when we were doing fuel switching, your prices would go up and reliability would decrease. And now what we have, and this is why I get so, I don't emotional, maybe angry about when Jared Polis talks about how he tries to lower prices. It is so categorically false because all you have to do is look at, okay, we're phasing out coal and prices go up.
Right.
Coal, okay, you can dislike coal. You can say it is, the pollution, whatever. But this idea that wind and solar would be cheaper was sold repeatedly, and it is literally a lie. And Colorado is a case study, and you've shown it. We are now, by the way, we're not that far from the national average, and there's nothing to be proud of on that.
Right.
But you've shown that as coal has diminished, because let's face it was the cheapest and most reliable form of power, but you can't sell that wind and solar are cheaper. Like, we literally are staring at the data that says it won't work. Like, it won't work.
Yeah.
So,
and I don't want to paint a too misleading of a picture that coal is completely off the grid or what have you in 2024. It was still about 28% of our electricity, so it's a big chunk.
But I guarantee you, when it's all gone, your prices will be even higher.
Well, and that's the thing. I make a note in my analysis because we saw that drop, but there weren't any coal retirements last year. But this year, almost 2 gigawatts is supposed to be retired by the end of the year. One of them technically is being converted to natural gas. It's the the Pawnee plant, I think it is, by XL. But 2 more, Comanche Unit 2, and I think Craig Unit 1 are both slated to be retired by the end of this year. And so we'll have an even more stark contrast when we lose 2 gigawatts of our baseload power. What does that do to the rates? What does that do to the generation we need to account for that loss of 2 gigawatts, which is a ton of power, believe me.
Right.
What is that going to do to our rates? So I think that's important to note as well. But again, I don't want to mislead folks about what the grid was, because it still was about 60% fossil fuels over the years. So they can tout all they want about how we're so close to meeting our carbon goals and what yada, yada, yada. But fossil fuels were still the backbone of Colorado's grid last year. It just wasn't coal. It was natural gas leading the way this time.
You also had something about peak, what is the demand in Colorado roughly, and how much has that gone up? And the other thing is, you also talked about the capacity factor for wind and solar, because that's the other. Those are 2 important issues. So talk about those.
Well, yeah, I always try to track capacity factor because, I mean, it's a big deal now, but it's not so much of a big deal because we still have so much coal and natural gas. But as we get further and further along the transition where we're retiring the gas and the coal, capacity factor is a big freaking deal, because those are the resources that we're supposedly relying on to keep the lights on 24/7 with resources that are not available 24/7. So the capacity factor, just to define the terms for folks listening, is the theoretical maximum that a power plant could produce if it lived up to its nameplate capacity. So if you had a 50 megawatt solar farm, theoretically, if it produced 50 megawatts all the time, which it doesn't, but theoretically, it would have a 100% capacity factor. Lower capacity factors means the power is not available, at least up to its nameplate capacity, for certain parts of the year. So nuclear, for example, is the quintessential super high capacity factor resource. It's usually about 93, 94% in a given year, which means 94% of the time that thing is chugging along and generating and producing electricity. And so the capacity factor of wind and solar in Colorado, wind is about 38%. So 38% of the time we're getting our wind energy. And solar is about 24%. So 24% of the time we're getting energy from our solar.
So quick question for you. You're doing some landscaping in your yard, let's say, or you own a business and you're going to hire employees. Do you hire the guy who shows up 24% of the time or 38% of the time?
Right.
I mean, that's how I'm just going to say, that's how stupid it is to try and power a grid with wind and solar.
Right. And this is the point we always make about why you've heard us say it before, the levelized cost of electricity, why we don't put much stock in that at all, because you could point to, well, the levelized cost as the solar plant is so cheap, but stuff like that doesn't account for capacity factor. And when things have such low capacity factor, you have to build much more of them, or you have to build, usually and actually, build backup fossil fuels, batteries, coal, nuclear, whatever it is. So you're building not only more than you need of a given resource, but you're also building a completely separate backup system to account for that 76% of the time that one resource isn't producing.
So when your guy doesn't show up, when you hire somebody, let's say you hire a cashier and they don't show up 67% of the time. So what do? You have to hire a backup cashier.
Right.
And then you probably have to have one that just stands there all the time, right, because your person who only shows up 30% of the time or 38% of the time, when all of a sudden decides, like, at one moment there's a long line, just goes, yeah, you know what, I'm done, right, takes off. So you have to have somebody right there, right then.
Yep.
Because you can't stop doing business. And it's interesting to me that we don't have a lot of conversations about this in Colorado. You don't hear the word firming,
right,
which is all the backup generation that you need to, quote, firm up a resource and firm up the grid. And I actually did a quick ChatGPT search of when did it start becoming part of the electricity lexicon?
Yeah.
And it was in the 70s and 80s, just as things like wind and solar were becoming more, people were experimenting with it on an industrial scale or a utility scale. So you will start hearing the word firming, I think, a lot more in the year. Well, now I'm going to introduce it and in years to come, because as Colorado, as we retire the rest of our coal, we will have to firm up the grid. We will have to, provide other resources. Essentially, you're shoring it up.
Yep.
It's that backup one that you call. It's that backup cashier you call because you're one who only, she's kind of temperamental, doesn't show, kind of shows up sort of when she wants. So you have the backup that's always on call, but you also have the one that's standing there immediately.
Yeah.
Who's there because she's just decided, she's done for the day. She's tired. She went out, stayed out late last night, and, she doesn't feel like turning on today. So you have the one who's there immediately. And that's what we talk about when we talk about firming.
Yeah.
Those resources are the firming resources. And so as we become to rely more and more and more on wind and solar to power our grid, you'll hear the term firming.
And to extend the metaphor a little bit, all those folks, the person on call, the guy that just stands there next to the cashier in case he needs to get tagged in, those folks are all, the time that they're idle are still on the payroll. They're still collecting paychecks. And by the way, when they do get called on, they're collecting overtime. They're not collecting the standard rate. And that's exactly how peaking gas plants work, for instance, is these expensive plants that you have to pay to maintain because they always got to be ready to jump into action. And then when they do jump into action, they're far less efficient than things like a combined cycle gas plant or a coal or nuclear plant that's running all the time. It's very expensive to quickly fire up an inefficient gas plant. And so you're paying for that with expensive electricity just because only made necessary because we've made the rest of our grid more intermittent.
Yeah, because we are the most efficient resources are not the ones we're using all the time. So the guy who shows up 93% of the time is not on the payroll. You don't even have him.
Yeah.
You've decided we're going to have the one that's temperamental and shows up 30%, and we're paying the guy who's standing right behind him, and we're paying somebody else to call on call just in case you need a little more. That's your battery backup.
Right.
I mean, it is nuts. So when Jared Polis tweets that we here in Colorado, we do everything we can to lower prices. We work to lower costs, not raise them. I mean, it's one of those times where, literally, I want to throw my computer out the window because it is such gaslighting.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good way to put it.
I mean, it is 100% false. So,
we'll of course link to the rest of this analysis in the show notes. Folks should definitely check it out. Like I said, it's always important to get a good primer when you hear politicians talk about how much they're working to lower your costs, when you hear grandiose promises about where the grid's going or what we can do to the grid, I think it's important to have a little dose of reality to look at what actually is the grid, how did it actually perform in the last year. And I think that obviously we all want our policymakers to inform their decisions based on reality and not and not fancy. But as we're coming up on time here, Amy, do you have any takeaways for our listeners?
I do. One is, as we continue to retire coal plants, your costs will continue to go up. So look at that. I mean, seriously, as these come offline, your costs are going to go up. Second, impress your friends by reading Jake's post because you will be able to rattle off statistics. You will have data and you will be the hit at your neighborhood, cocktail party or, buffet, whatever it is you guys do, you are going to be the hit because you'll have all the facts and figures. And then I'm telling you, now that I'm reminded about coal going offline, get a generator, get something, get backup, get your own because you don't want to trust the guy who's on call. He just might not show up either.
Right.
You don't know.
Yeah, the folks that aren't talking about firming, so you need to talk about firming for your own power.
Right, yeah, firm your own house.
Yeah, good point. But that does it for us on another episode of PowerGab. If you like what you saw here, you can head over to IITV, or PowerGab.org, rather, to check out our entire back catalog. We produce new episodes every single week. We're also available wherever you get your audio shows, whether that's Spotify or Apple. And if you'd like to reach out to us to suggest future show topics or guests you'd like to see us interview, you can send those to info@powergab.org. We always love to hear from you guys. And until next week, we'll see you.